Hi, everyone. So I might be showing my age here, but do you all know about mixtapes and what a massive cultural phenomena they were? In the post reel to reel, post 8-track days, I'm mostly talking the 80s here, the popularity of the cassette meant that people could, for the very first time, readily create their own playlists at home. And this was huge in youth culture at the time. CDs and MP3s took over not long thereafter, but the concept of the mixtape endures in our preference for playlist-style listening today. I mention this because one thing that comes up in this week's readings is Harry Smith's 1952 Anthology of American Folk Music, which, among other things, probably invented the idea of the mixtape. More broadly, I really don't think it's possible to overstate just how influential these 3 and later 4 volumes of recordings were. Each generation that encounters them has a different takeaway, but it's always a big one. Like for the listeners of the 1950s, it spawned national interest in folk that would go on to shape the entire social consciousness of the 1960s. Some, like music journalist Mark Richardson, believe that the 1997 reissue of the anthology had a lot to do with the subsequent turn toward the weird, freak, and free folk music of the early 2000s. But most concretely, the original publication of the anthology represented just one person's take on selecting music and presenting it in a certain way. And that concept is actually really big. In her book about 78 collectors, Amanda Petrusic says, previously, these tracks were islands, isolated platters of shellac that existed independently of anything else. Even flipping over a 78 required disruptive action, shifting the medium from the one song per side 78 to the long-playing vinyl album allowed, finally, for songs to be juxtaposed in deliberate ways. It's possible now, of course, to dump all 84 tracks onto one digital playlist and experience the entire anthology uninterrupted, but I still prefer to acknowledge the demarcations between its 3 sections, to play it as Smith did. Harry Smith, this avant-garde filmmaker and record collector, curated a listening experience, and in some ways, that meant that the music became a little bit his. You all have probably made your own playlists before, and we usually feel a little bit of a sense of ownership or authorship in that. And in the case of the anthology, another part of experience it is the physical artifact itself, with the artwork and these very unusual and poetic notes from Smith. He was actually awarded a Lifetime Achievement Grammy in '91, and what he said upon accepting the award reveals that he definitely knew the impact that the anthology had had, because he said, quote, "I'm glad to say that my dreams came true, that I saw America changed through music." So through his personal selection of 84 performances recorded between 1926 and 1933, Harry Smith highlighted early black blues and white country music, Cajun recordings, hymns and sacred music, and more, put together in some kind of loose framework that single-handedly redefined folk music. And sure, there were and are other compilations of various folk musics, but Smith's project seemed to have a personality in and of itself. Just like its creator, it was a little bit intellectual, mysterious, and witty in a kind of deadpan way. Many people have written about the Anthology of American Folk Music, and there's a great article in the New York Times from back when it was reissued in 1997. In it, the author Tom Piazza supposes that despite the obvious significance of race in the collection, Smith resolutely avoided mentioning it. So the rationale for listening to a track on the anthology was not that it represented the voice of a particular ethnic group, which is, of course, what can make recordings compelling to some listeners, but rather they all represented a kind of collective strangeness, passion, and mystery, these feelings that Smith seems to point to as universal human traits. In the 1950s, at a time when powerful currents of standardization and assimilation were everywhere, when America was asking itself in not always good ways what it meant to be American, here came this musical cultural paradox in the form of vinyl records, and it energized a new generation of performers and folklorists. I've linked Piazza's article below, and I'd recommend reading it. I'd also recommend listening to the samples, especially critically and imaginatively this week. Of course, Harry Smith's anthology is only one piece of the puzzle in the Lornell chapter for this week, but as you work, try and imagine how odd and mind-blowing it is to first hear those tracks from the 1920s and 30s, and see how you can trace those sounds in the ones of the folk revivalists. Also, in case you're curious, there is a physical copy of the Anthology of American Folk Music in the library at ETSU if you want to see it for yourself. I happen to be borrowing this one from Professor Roy Andrade, who keeps it in his office and would probably happily let you take a look at it. So enjoy the reading and really sit with the recordings. And next time you listen to or create a playlist, think about the 1952 mixtape man himself, Mr. Harry Smith. Have a great week.